It was an early autumn morning in Spokane, Washington, and the air was slightly chilly. Faint sunlight filtered through a foggy window pane, casting a soft glow on the old wooden table where Mr. Thomas Whitaker was brewing coffee. At 76 years old, widowed for over a decade, he lived alone in a quiet two-story house nestled at the end of a maple-lined street. On the table sat a vintage radio, beside a collection of jazz records he played every morning. Louis Armstrong, Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald. Those classic voices seemed to transport him back to his youth, when he used to sing with a small church band, before life swept him into the whirlwind of work, responsibilities, and quiet sacrifices. Thomas once dreamed of becoming a singer, but after marrying Margaret, his wife, and welcoming their first daughter, that dream was tucked away in a wooden box up in the attic, alongside old photographs, handwritten letters, and a music notebook he'd kept since 1968. He never regretted choosing family, but sometimes, on especially quiet evenings, he would hum an old tune in the kitchen, as if summoning the shadow of his younger self. Before we continue on Thomas's extraordinary journey, if you too believe that a person's true worth is not in their age or appearance, but in their unwavering passion and persistence, then please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share these inspiring stories with more people. Now, let's return to the story, where surprises still await. Old age arrives like morning mist, gentle but also cold. His daughter, Linda, now lived in the Netherlands with her little family. They still FaceTimed on weekends, but the distance seemed to be measured not just in miles, but in years. His best friend, Harold, had passed away last year from cancer. The names in his phone book had slowly dwindled. The house, though small, felt increasingly spacious when there was only one person in it. One day, while Thomas was dusting the attic, he found that old wooden box. A thick layer of dust coated it, but when he lifted the lid, the scent of aged wood and paper washed over him like a wave of memories. Inside, alongside photos and the music notebook, was a cassette tape with a faded handwritten label. Tom, 1972, audition recording. That afternoon, his grandson Max dropped by with an apple pie and helped fix a malfunctioning Bluetooth speaker. Max was 16, loved skateboarding, wore headphones all day, but always gave his grandfather a special kind of patience that Thomas deeply appreciated. When Thomas showed him the tape, Max's eyes widened. "You used to sing, like, for real?" Thomas chuckled, his voice raspy but gentle. "Just once upon a time. I had a few dreams, that's all." Max said nothing. Then, but a few days later, while Thomas was watering the garden, the boy called out from inside the house, "Grandpa, did you know America's Spotlight is holding open auditions downtown in Spokane next week? I sent in your recording." Thomas froze beside the blooming autumn chrysanthemums. He turned back to look at Max, thinking he must have misheard. "What did you say?" "I just thought people should hear you sing. Like I did. Your voice still has soul, you know. I'm sorry if I overstepped." Thomas remained silent for a long time. It had been decades since he last stood before an audience. His body wasn't the same. His voice had faded. But what scared him most was fear itself. Fear that it was too late. Fear of being laughed at. Fear that the spotlight no longer belonged to an old man with trembling hands. That night, he sat, again by the old radio. In his ears played the sound of his own voice from 1972, youthful, full of hope. The music felt like a door creaking open to a room he had locked long ago. He opened the old music notebook and flipped to his favorite song, "What a Wonderful World." He sang quietly at first, then louder. His voice was still raspy, but the emotion hadn't aged a day. In the mirror, he didn't just see an old man with silver hair, but someone who had once dreamed, once loved deeply, and once silently sacrificed it all. When the clock struck 10 p.m., he closed the notebook and looked out the window, where golden leaves fell in quiet surrender. And he knew. It was time to sing again. Not for a prize, not for an audience, but for himself. 2 days later, Thomas received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end belonged to a young man, polite, though a bit rehearsed. "Hello, Mr. Whitaker. My name is Joel Rivers. I oversee the Northwest region for America's Spotlight. We just listened to a recording submitted by your grandson, and honestly, we're very impressed." Thomas gave a faint chuckle, his hand resting on a cup of hot tea. "Impressed by an old man singing from 50 years ago?" Joel laughed. "Perhaps. That's exactly why we'd like to invite you to audition in person during next week's taping of the preliminary round at the Spokane Convention Center. We'll cover all expenses. All we ask is that you bring yourself." Thomas didn't respond immediately. After a few seconds of silence, he simply said, "Let me think about it." That evening, he video called his daughter. Linda appeared, on the screen in a white lab coat, her face tired after a long day at the hospital. "Dad, you're calling early. Everything all right?" Linda, "Do you remember I used to sing?" Linda laughed. "You used to lull me to sleep with Fly Me. To the moon. I'll never forget that. Well, what if I told you I've been invited to sing again? What would you think?" Linda paused. In the dim screen light, her eyes sparkled. "I think it's time you did something just for yourself. Not for Mom. Not for me. For you." Friday. Morning. Thomas stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the gray tie Margaret had picked out for him on their 30th wedding anniversary. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were clear. He packed a small suitcase, a pair of reading glasses, and a worn-out notebook, filled with lyrics he had written in neat, deliberate handwriting. On the bus ride into downtown, he sat beside a boy wearing headphones. When the bus stopped, Thomas gave a gentle nod and stepped off, quiet as a late autumn breeze. That day, the Spokane Convention Center was more alive than ever. Young and old, dance crews, acoustic bands, all lined up to register. Laughter, guitar strums, stage managers rushing around. The air buzzed like a place where every dream had a shot at being rewritten. Thomas entered the waiting area. A girl with bright red-dyed hair was rehearsing her vocals, while a boy nearby beatboxed between bites of a sandwich. Some people glanced curiously at him. Others didn't notice at all. A young staffer named Kayla came over and guided him into the prep room. "Would you like some tea? We've got chamomile, ginger, black tea, if you have it," he said. "Absolutely," Kayla replied with a warm smile. "So, what song are you singing? What a wonderful world." She paused for a moment, her gaze softening. "A beautiful choice. Have you ever sung it in front of an audience?" Thomas looked out the window. "No, but I used to sing it for the woman I loved, every night after dinner, before she fell asleep." Kayla didn't say anything. She just gently placed a hand on his shoulder and quietly left the room. An hour later, when his name was called, Thomas stood backstage, listening to the noise of the crowd beyond the curtain. The judges were familiar TV personalities. Under the lights, they looked cold and sharp. The audience wasn't exactly excited. Some were checking their phones. Others were chatting. A headset-wearing crew member leaned in and said, "You'll go on right after the current act finishes. Don't worry. They just want something heartfelt before the break." Heartfelt, Thomas repeated in his mind. Part of him felt like he was just there as an emotional gimmick, but the other part didn't care anymore. He closed his eyes. His mind, he saw Margaret sitting at the old piano, smiling softly. He felt young again, not in body but in spirit. The show's theme music played. The host walked out onto the stage. And now, a very special contestant, Mr. Thomas Whitaker, 76 years old from Spokane, is here to share a surprising melody with us. Please welcome him. Polite applause followed. Not overly enthusiastic, not dismissive. Just the kind of lukewarm courtesy offered before a performance no one expected much from. Thomas stepped out. The spotlight hit his eyes. The hall fell silent. He placed his hand on the microphone, took a deep breath, and began, "I see trees of green. I see trees of green. Red roses, too." The first sound from Thomas's mouth floated out like a gentle breeze, raspy and soft. The entire auditorium didn't so much hear it as feel it. He didn't try to belt out long notes or show off technique. He simply sang as if whispering to someone who was no longer there. I see them bloom, for me and you. A few murmurs echoed from the back of the hall. A young person glanced at their friend, raising an eyebrow. One of the judges, a Grammy-winning singer, tilted her head slightly as if trying to decide, was this a touching moment or just a fleeting whim of old age? Thomas closed his eyes. He couldn't see the stage lights, nor feel the gaze of over 300 pairs of eyes. In his mind, there was only one image: Margaret sitting on the sofa with a cup of mint tea, her legs wrapped in the green knitted blanket she loved. Every time he sang this song, she would smile like it was the first time. Hearing it, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. By this point, his voice had grown steadier, not from practice, but from memory. From summer afternoons on the porch, watching sunsets with Margaret, from nights singing their daughter to sleep beside her small wooden bed, from all those long years where music was the one place he could still be himself. In the control room, the show's director had just been about to cut to a different camera, but stopped. One auto cam zoomed in on Thomas's face, the light catching the deep lines on his forehead, but his eyes glowing like candlelight in the dark. Backstage, the red-haired girl from earlier, the one who'd been yawning during her wait, now stood straight. Her hand clenched the sleeve of her jacket. A young cameraman trainee behind the rig never took his eyes off the monitor. Among the audience, some sat transfixed, some were wiping away tears. An elderly woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "That voice. It sounds like when we were young. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky." Thomas took a gentle step forward. His legs trembled slightly, but his voice did not. Every word he sang felt like a heartbeat he was releasing into the air. And when he reached, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world, a man stood up and began clapping, slowly, then another and another, until the whole auditorium awakened. Applause, whistles, people rising from the back rows, all swelling into a wave of shared emotion. Thomas bowed his head. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply stood there, quietly. His eyes closed just a little, as if etching this moment into the deepest part of his heart. The Grammy-winning judge picked up her microphone, voice low. "Mr. Whitaker, today you didn't just sing a song. You told a story, and I believe we all heard it." The male judge, known for being harsh, nodded. "None of us expected this, and that's exactly why it's unforgettable." Backstage, Kayla hugged him tightly. "You did it, Mr. Thomas. I've never seen anyone sing like that, like you were singing with your whole life." Thomas gave a soft smile. "Because that's all I had to give." At that very moment, his phone buzzed. A message from Linda. "Dad, I just watched the live stream. I'm crying. I'm so proud of you. Margaret would be too. You know that." Thomas clutched the phone gently. His eyes were red, but his composure never faltered. There was nothing more he needed to say. That evening, the video of his performance was clipped and uploaded to the show's social media. In under 8 hours, it had garnered hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of comments. He reminded me of my father. "I'm 70 and I've never dared step on a stage, but now I think maybe I will." A voice doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. In a quiet corner of Spokane, in a modest house at the end of a maple-lined street, Thomas returned home with a cup of hot tea and his old radio. But in his heart, the world had changed. 3 days after the performance, Thomas sat by the window, a cup of hot tea in hand, with morning sunlight streaming through the frame. The yellow chrysanthemums in the yard were still in full bloom, but something even more vibrant was blooming. Inside him, a feeling of being alive again, as if awakening from a decades-long slumber. His old phone, once used only to call Linda or check the weather, now buzzed every hour. Max had helped him set up a Facebook account, just for fun, but it had since become a place where thousands of people shared their stories and the memories they'd rediscovered in his voice. "I listened to your song after losing my mom. It made me cry, and reminded me that the world is still beautiful. You reminded me of my father. He used to sing this to my mom every night before she passed away. Mr. Thomas, your voice isn't just music. It's a whisper. From a generation we're slowly forgetting. Thomas read each comment slowly, reading glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he just smiled quietly. But then came a letter, not through the internet, but by regular post. A pale yellow envelope with neatly handwritten script. He opened it, his hands slightly trembling. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and an old photograph, a voice class from 1971. The first lines of the letter read, "Dear Mr. Whitaker, I don't expect you to remember me. My name is Julian Price, a senior music student at the University of Oregon in 1971. You were the teaching assistant for the vocal class back then. I was an insecure, unsettled student, often mocked by others. One day, you stayed after class and said to me, 'Your voice isn't perfect, but the emotion is real. Don't let anyone take that away.' I don't know if you remember saying that, but I've never forgotten. After watching your performance on America's Spotlight, I wept. Not just because it was beautiful, but because you still carry the love for music just like you did back then. Today, I'm the head of the music department at our old university. I'd like to invite you as the honorary speaker at this year's graduation ceremony, not for fame, but because today's students need to hear from someone like you." Thomas read the letter 3 times. He set the photo on the table and stared at himself from more than half a century ago. Thick hair, hopeful eyes, standing beside Julian, a shy, skinny young man smiling next to the piano. He sighed, both wistful and at peace. Who would have thought that just once daring to step on stage could unlock doors to a past long buried? That afternoon, Max rode over on his bike, carrying another envelope, an official invitation from the America's Spotlight organizers. Thomas had made it to the special season finals to be filmed in Los Angeles in 3 weeks, alongside 9 others from across the country. Flight tickets, hotel, itinerary. Everything was arranged. Thomas looked at Max, his expression serious. "Do you think I should go?" Max answered without hesitation. "Not going would be the real mistake, Grandpa. They need to hear more from you." "It's not that I'm afraid," Thomas said thoughtfully. "I'm just scared that this time, if I fail, there won't be another chance." Max sat down. Beside him, voice low but firm. "You already got on that stage, sang from your heart, and touched thousands of people. Isn't that victory enough? What's left to fear?" Thomas nodded. For the first time in his life, he felt not just heard, but understood. That night, he entered his room and opened the old wooden box, the one that held Margaret's letters. A few old photos and a handwritten sheet of Smile by Nat King Cole. Beneath it, he found a small folded note. It was Margaret's handwriting. "Tom, if one day you sing again, sing like you did the first time you sang for me. No effort, no proving. Just sing with love." He smiled gently, closed the box, and looked out the window. The Spokane night sky was as peaceful as ever. But inside him, something was getting ready to take flight. 3 weeks later, Mr. Thomas Whitaker stood alone backstage at America's Spotlight. Special season finale, the national finals in Los Angeles. In front of him, red velvet curtains. Beyond them, dazzling lights, camera shutters, the director's ice shouts, and the murmur of thousands of audience members eagerly waiting to see the night's final act. "Are you ready?" Kayla, now more like a granddaughter than just a backstage assistant, asked gently. Thomas gave a slight nod. He wore a brand new charcoal suit, custom selected by the show's wardrobe designer, but he kept his old glasses and a vintage patterned handkerchief, the one Margaret gave him for his birthday in 1982. In his hand was the sheet music for Smile. Tonight, he wasn't competing for a prize. He knew full well he wouldn't be signing a record deal, going on tour, or becoming a social media star. But he was here for another reason, to close a chapter in his life he once thought had been lost forever. And now, the host's voice echoed through the hall, the final performance of the evening. A man who brought tears to America, a voice that reminds us of the beauty and slowness in things that arrive late but still right on time. Please welcome Mr. Thomas Whitaker. The spotlight flared. The entire auditorium watched as an elderly man with silver hair walked slowly but firmly onto the stage, each step steady, as if he had walked this path many times before, though in truth, this was only his second. Thomas stood at center stage. He drew in a deep breath. The noise faded. He couldn't hear the audience or see the cameras. There was only light, warmth, and a great silence before the first notes began. Smile, though your heart is aching. His voice was soft at first, barely more than a breath, but by the second line something broke open. Not because he sang louder, but because he sang truthfully. Every lyric felt like a message to anyone who had ever felt too late, overlooked, or underestimated. Light up your face with gladness. Hide every trace of sadness. In one section of the audience, Linda clutched her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Few rows behind, Max whispered, "That's my grandpa." On the live stream, comments poured in nonstop. "I'm 68. Tomorrow I'm signing up for my first singing class. He's singing with all the years no one heard him." This is the first time I've seen silence on stage feel so profound. As Thomas sang the final line, "You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile." The entire auditorium held its breath. Then, just like before, one person stood up, then another, then hundreds. Applause, whistles, and cheers erupted, not for technical brilliance, but because their hearts had been awakened. The host returned to the stage, eyes glassy as he held the mic. "Mr. Thomas, you've taught us that the stage isn't reserved for the young. It belongs to anyone brave enough to be honest, brave enough to sing what they've been holding inside." Thomas bowed deeply. He didn't say a word. He simply placed his hand over his heart, which still beat slow but steady. Then he walked off the stage, without looking back. The next morning, in a hotel room overlooking Hollywood Boulevard, Thomas sat sipping tea. Linda was packing their suitcase. Max lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his messages. A knock came at the door. Kayla entered, holding a large envelope and a bouquet of sunflowers. "Mr. Thomas, this is for you. From the show's executive board." He opened the envelope. Inside was an official letter. "We'd like to invite you back for the next season, not as a contestant, but as an inspirational mentor for older participants who hesitate, thinking it's too late. We don't just need your voice. We need your spirit." Thomas folded the letter and gently placed it on the table. He looked out at the clear blue sky and smiled softly. "Margaret," he whispered, "did you see that? I sang again. And this time, someone listened." And so, the story of Mr. Thomas Whitaker came to a close, a journey back to the stage. After half a century of silence, not to prove anything, but simply to sing with his heart. If this story touched you, please click like and subscribe, so we have the strength to keep sharing quiet but powerful stories like this one. We'll see you again on the next journey, where hope is never too late.